ask that you're supreme. You are great to the wherever you've been. Your vision is better than anything you've seen. Standing where many have suffered and been grieved. Woman, don't bow down. Don't let them silence you.
Welcome to It's a Feminist Thing. This is a conversation that is forward, fearless, and unapologetically feminist. We lay everything on the table, honey, and nothing is off limits. We are here as a direct response to what is happening to women in South Africa. Our country has one of the highest incidents of femicide, rape, and violence against women. It's almost 20 years since the rape of 9-month-old baby Tshepang, and we're still in crisis, unsafe in our homes and on the streets. My name is Khomotso Matsunyane, and for the next 8 weeks, I will be joined by my co-hosts, Fina Kodisang, who's the CEO of the Soul City Institute for Social Justice, Niko Shikwambane, who's a media practitioner and activist,
Hello.
and last but not least, feminist educator, speaker, and founder of Mteto and Ubuntu Studies, Thando Kumede.
Yes.
You sit back and relax and join us in conversation as we navigate how to make our society equitable and safe for women. So I'm going to assume that we're all feminists. Yeah?
Yes.
And my fellow sisters, I have to ask you, why in particular in South Africa do we need feminism?
We have a beautiful constitution, very beautiful, you know. Lefatshe le lotlhe le bua ka constitution ya rona. Mara ke mang mosadi wa ka reng yena o enjoy the freedoms that are enshrined in the constitution.
Ga ba bantsi.
Well, actually, I mean, let me be very frank and uncomfortable here. Our constitution is a feminist document, unapologetically so. It was drafted by mostly women, and most of those women were unapologetically feminist women. So when the constitution was being drafted and when its principles were being formulated, it was literally a battle between patriarchy and feminism. And looking at the final results, feminism is what won. But more than that, if you look at this space as a platform for engagement and you look at other historical regimes and oppressive regimes, media has been used as a mechanism to propagate hate. It was used to make people discriminate against other human beings, unfairly so. So in my view, if historically we could propagate hate using media, then I believe that we could propagate love and respect and equity using the same media.
Without a doubt, I think this show is a perfect example of how media can be used for the good of the community. And media is a very powerful tool that can be used quite effectively. I'm so proud that she's sitting on the table with us, but I want to show you an example of how media can be used to effect change and to send a very strong message. Let's watch.
This is a testament to the people and the municipal government.
Nice.
Remember,
No, I got too much.
Thank you very much.
I get emotional watching that every single time. Nico, what did that feel like?
Well, it was one of the scariest moments of my life. My gut was literally vibrating. My mother called, terrified. You know, I wasn't sure what was going to happen to me after that moment. But I'm so proud to have been part of this protest because of what it did to catapult women's issues and rape and really usher it into mainstream conversation, right? But I think what really also matters is that in feminist work is feminist ethic, right, that must be at the center of it. So I'm really glad that we actually got a thumbs up from Fezek Akuzwayo, who we now remember as Kwezi before we did the protest.
That's just incredible. Remembering that feminism is not just rage, right? There's a fear, a real fear that comes with speaking truth to power. We're not stones, guys. If you hit me, I bleed. If you hit me, I bruise. If you hit me, I hurt. And on that note, I'm just curious as to who made you a feminist?
For me, being a Christian actually made me a feminist. You go to church, you hear how men are centered as the only people that have done all these things. And you're like, but where were the women? Surely there must have been women who also could do all these things that the men are doing. You know, why are we only hearing about the men? You know, so wanting to understand the voice of women, wanting to elevate that voice made me a feminist.
This is so weird because I speak a lot about dismantling white heteropatriarchy. I speak a lot against, whiteness and racism and heteronormativity and all these things. But the people who actually made me a feminist are old white women. I had women, especially at school, who literally put me on their shoulders, told me I was amazing, that I was beautiful, told me to be more of myself. And the bigger irony in that is that the people who I actually fight for and represent today did not necessarily do that for me.
Yeah, I think what I've always recognized that different genders would treated differently and that they had different privileges from a very early age. But I think what really made me feminist in my activism was that moment during FISMA's fall protest in 2015 at Wits University when the men who were leading the protest refused to let the SRC president, Nompendulo Mkhatshwa, address the student body in protest. That for me was just also a depiction of South Africa's obsession with male revolutionary heroism. And from then on, I knew that, you know what? This is the badge that I'm going to wear, and this is the fight that I'm going to choose.
What is feminism to you, Fina?
For me, it's about a liberation movement, recognizing that we come from a time where all of us were united in fighting apartheid as a system, but women were left behind. So when we got our liberation, women were not liberated. So feminism is about liberating women. The struggle for liberation for women is still going on.
That's why for me, I feel like feminism for me, it's like, you had the African National Congress negotiating or attempting to negotiate with the white powers that be, and they were getting nowhere. And at some point, they had to pick up arms and say, right, we are forming Umkhonto weSizwe. For me, that is the feminist response that is happening right now. It's a militant response in a way to a very grave problem on the war against women in South Africa.
But also in addition to that, there are some women who don't identify as feminist, but when you look at the work that they do, they do feminist work because feminism is a doing, and a being, and it's not really just about, using the language of feminism to say, this is what you identify as. But, and this is why we have our language feature. Each week, we'll be joined by Bonso Pilani, a wordsmith who has created a Setswana dictionary that translates feminist terms. Welcome, Bonso, and thank you for joining us. Now, you and Lerato Motongo decided to start a feminist dictionary in Setswana. How did that project come about?
So Lerato and I have been Twitter friends for quite a number of years, and we were actually talking about being Botswana women and our feminist journeys on Twitter. And somebody who was a man, obviously, challenged us, are king feminism elibuang ka yone e ka Setswana. Lerato promptly responded, are feminism ki budumedi mo di tshwanelong le kgolosego ya batho ba ba nang le bong bo sa tshwaneng le bo re buitseng. So essentially in English is the translation is that feminism is the belief in the equality of women, or like in the specific context that we're talking about women ourselves, basadi bomme. But when we look at it in a more holistic way, feminism is not this binary that exists between men and women, but it's about the emancipation kapa freedom, this kgolosego e re buang ka yone of people, to be a feminist or to say feminism ke tumelo mo ditshwanelong le kgolosego ya batho ba bangwe ka bong ba bona. So whatever it is that your gender is, that is your rights and the freedom to be in that gender. You know, and it's an ever changing process. Re tlile ka yone dictionary e gore re kgone bua le bo mme ba rona le bo rre ba rona le bo nkoko ba rona ka feminism, ka the work that we do, this very important work, and it is very important for us to come up with the language, the words gore ga mama botsa gore feminism king o bua o kwala ka dilong tso re feminism ke eng
O kgone go se tlhalosa.
and
I'm very curious as to gore like ka seZulu gona re ka beya yang Thando.
NgeZulu ngachaza ukuthi ene sonke siyabantu sihlukile asifani sonke.
Of course.
Kodwa kufanele sihloniphane kwaphela nje.
Yawuza.
But Pontsho, I like your language e re fa expression. Ko Pitori re o te express. Ba bana yo fa o te express o itlhalose gore what you are feeling, what you are going through ke eng. So it's beautiful that we can put it in our own languages.
Yes, no, definitely, Fina. It's very important. A very famous poet, a feminist poet, Koleka Putuma, talks about my grandmother says, "Hey, I'm a daughter." I say patriarchy. It's just that the expression, and collectively through this show, is to bridge the generations of mama le rona, the younger ones coming after us can understand and know how to talk about feminism.
I would say, "Hey, na I'm a daughter."
And I kirata gore like ra simolla. You know, gore like I mean, it's amazing to be sitting at the table with somebody who's starting a whole dictionary.
Thank you so much, Pontsho. I, for one, look forward to all the beautiful language we are going to learn here. Setswana sa rona se sentle. We'd love to hear how you translate this term in your own language. Leave a comment on our social media pages using the hashtag on your screen. And after this, we unpack why we need feminism.
Don't let them silence you. Don't let them silence you.
Joining our conversation is Heini Grudenbaum, who is the director at the Center for Humanities Research at the University of the Western Cape. She's also a scholar, activist, and poet whose work focuses on social and aesthetic responses to the afterlives of genocide, war, and mass violence. Welcome, Heidi.
Hi, it's lovely to be in conversation with you, Thando. I'm good, thank you.
Right off the bat, Heidi, are you a feminist?
I can answer that. It's probably the easiest question tonight, yes.
And when exactly did you decide that you were a feminist?
I think I was about 18 years old, and I discovered a book by one of the older generation first wave North American feminists. And I came to understand that the relationships between men and women and the social status of women was engineered and structured in such a way that wasn't natural. And that made me realize that the lives of women are determined by an invisible structure that is very confining, controlling, and repressive.
Yeah.
And it started a lifelong journey or engagement or commitment with what it means to live in ways that dismantle or contribute towards the dismantling of the system, and that shaped my understanding of the way in which racial and gender oppression in South Africa operated.
You know, speaking of gender oppression, Heidi, South Africa is always quoted among the worst in the world with GBV and femicide. How is this related to the trauma of our recent past as a country?
Our long history of settler colonialism and apartheid have profoundly compounded the effects of misogyny, patriarchy, and forms of violence that we call gender-based violence, but I think are much, much more complex. But I think that with the dual inheritance of slavery in the 18th and 19th century, and then the system of permanent forced migrancy that continued up till today after the mineral revolution, the discovery of gold and diamonds, the effect of these two interrelated institutions of slavery and forced permanent migrancy have profoundly shaped the way in which we understand misogyny and violence, particularly against women and children, but also men of color or Black people.
You know, my question to you is, how has feminism evolved from apartheid to democracy in dismantling all of these diverse forms of patriarchy that we've just kind of, you know, briefly unpacked in this conversation so far?
So, you know, the first women's organization was established by Charlotte Maxeke in the early 1900s, around the time of the First World War. She wasn't called a feminist. That wasn't the language of the day, but the struggle for the dignity, rights, and equality of women has been a long one in South Africa. And so we've not given enough of an account to the importance of the activism of women in the national liberation struggle. With all political struggles, you know, there are rights secured and ground and territory kind of won in different phases of struggle. So it was only with the Bill of Rights and that women were formally acknowledged as equal citizens. This was a huge achievement and a huge victory in the struggle for at least formal legal equality.
Just before we let you go, you know, could you help us imagine what the future would be like, the future of an intersectional feminist society? What would that look like?
Wow. We have an obligation in South Africa to understand how we can build a Black-led green economy that is feminist and communalist in some way. So where we understand that our relationship to what we call nature or the environment and our relationship to one another cannot be imagined as linear, extractive, exploitable. We have to reimagine growth, but we also have to reimagine seriously inventing an economic model fit for the 21st century in which feminist values are central.
Thank you so much. You know, there are a number of things that kind of stuck out. For me personally, it's about dismantling the myth of these social structures that, quite frankly, we're not responsible for creating, and we don't know why they're there. But also it's about, I think, the mistake that some of our leaders made, our feminist women leaders, during the apartheid era was thinking that, you know, focusing on the racialized element of fighting against apartheid was enough. But in fact, we really had to be intentional in using feminism to dismantle patriarchy, because patriarchy in itself has got racialized elements. So quite frankly, Heidi, I think we need a feminist government, you know. But there's other ways we can get to that. Thank you so much for joining the conversation.
Thank you, Heidi.
Amandla. Thank you. Imagine how much better the world would be if we all identified as feminists. If we all were committed to the principle and the idea of equity. And the first steps towards this authentic allyship. How can men meaningfully participate in the feminist movement for change? We discuss that next. It's a feminist thing, and asijigi. We are feminists, and we are here to confront patriarchy and its handmaidens, one conversation at a time. We are joined by feminist writer and journalist Gail Smith to talk about apartheid and its impact on the feminist movement in South Africa. Welcome, Gail.
Thank you very much, women.
Yes. So good to have you.
No turning back.
Gail, what has been the specific impact of the apartheid system on Black women, as well as the sexual violence that has been levied against Black women's bodies?
The first thing you have to understand is that apartheid and patriarchy really mimicked each other. So apartheid was a system about inequality, domination, and dependence. Patriarchy is a system of inequality, domination, and dependence. So apartheid was a hierarchy which posited white men at the top and then other inferiors, white women, Black men, and then Black women were really cemented and embedded into the bottom strata of this. So you have to understand that they were twins. Apartheid and patriarchy were conceptual twins. And so part of that, because they valued Black men as labor, Black women were seen as the unwanted baggage of Black men. So part of the apartheid structure and the design of apartheid was to take Black men into mines and to retain Black women and children on farms as free labor. So South Africa was a contest between the white British mining capital and white Afrikaner landowners, and there was a battle for labor. But they very much wanted Black men whom they called the muscular machines. But Black women and children were meant to be retained on farms as either unpaid or cheap labor. So it was a very specific system. And so apartheid's view of Native women is that they were the unwanted appendages. They were the unwanted women. So the idea was they didn't belong in cities, right? So in Johannesburg, for instance, throughout the 1920s and the 1930s, every single newspaper ran stories and headlines about Native women as prostitutes. If you were a single woman who was not connected to a man, you were immediately viewed to be a prostitute. So there was a lot of public discussion about Black women as being disease-ridden, right? Because we were seen as the danger to white supremacy, and white men couldn't resist us. So we were a danger to them. We trapped them. And we were going to dilute the bloodline. So what you see under apartheid then is a very, very consistent policy of legislation intended to cement Black women into that.
Let's move into the liberation movement, right? And now the fight against apartheid. How has the misogynoir, sort of in the political movement, led to the villainization of women who spoke up, like Winnie Mandela?
Well, I think it's important to understand that misogynoir was actually legal, right? And so Black women couldn't, for instance, own or buy freehold. You couldn't buy land. You could migrate to Johannesburg, but you could never own it. So it was a legalized version of misogynoir. It wasn't just a feeling. It was legislated. It was legalized, right? So then you get Black women who specifically and consciously challenge it. So before Winnie, when Winnie comes to Johannesburg, there are already women working, you know, in the space to challenge it. And so what you begin to see over the years with women like Winnie and other women who are fighting the system is that there is a demonization of them. And Winnie then becomes, in the eyes of white South Africa, not Black South Africa, in the eyes of white South Africa, she becomes this dirty terrorist. So they flip the narrative on her, and she increasingly becomes this dangerous woman, dangerous to the state. And so that's then when Black women start challenging. And in fact, Black women were a lot more vocal and violent than Black men. And that's what a lot of people don't know. In 1913, for instance, African, Indian, and colored women in the Free State were the only people in the country that had to have passes in the Free State. Those women not only rejected it, they went onto the street and they fought pitched battles with white policemen. Literally, these men were clubbing them, they were fighting back. And they went out on the streets, they fought, and they chose to go to jail to do hard labor rather than carry passes. So you see a long tradition of African women in particular fighting the system.
It is absolutely nonsense to suggest that Black women's roles has always been passive. How do you think apartheid has influenced this narrative?
Well, it was a convenient and an important narrative because that was in taking away our land, they had to create this fantasy African homeland that none of us had. This was our African homeland. So they created this notion of these reserves. They all had this great idea of these reserves where black women resided, and you know, black men would want to have cattle and go back. So they were the magnets that in the white imagination would pull them back from the cities. It was all part of a structure and built. And it preceded apartheid because the colonials who were in charge up until 1948, so the segregationist state, it was a convenient narrative for them to paint African women as these docile beasts of burden in the rural reserves. It was a narrative that was constructed because it fitted the political economy. Because that's what it was about money at the end of the day. So it's totally a construct, a made-up thing, right? To actually obfuscate the real power that black women had in terms of their role in the agrarian economy of the time.
Gail, I mean, you articulate very powerfully how apartheid broke down the black family system. You know, how do we then rebuild? How do we get to a point where we reclaim all these things, you know, and stop the narrative from being helpless, but where we now own our own narrative?
Well, I think the first thing is recognizing that both apartheid and colonialism were opportunistic intrusions into black life. It was absolutely essential that they intrude because part of it was also wanting to disempower black people economically. There was a conscious thing that we had to be economically disempowered because if we had economic power, we could fight back. So there were so many ways in which they were disempowering us, but the intrusion into the black family, the intrusions into custom and culture were all intended to cement African women beneath black men legally, which is why when Winnie marries Nelson, they have a prenup, and she was one of the first women to have a prenup because he recognized that a woman with agency is the biggest threat to white male patriarchy. So him and Winnie then decide we're going to have, because then they cannot touch her because they accord men power. So in giving her that prenup, he effectively protected what she owned over the years. They couldn't take it away from her. So how do we do it? One, we begin to recognize that these were opportunistic intrusions into our family structures, and they were creations, and to begin to have the discussion about how we reclaim our family spaces as much more equal spaces as opposed to the imposition of a white Western notion of family, where you have the pater familias, which is where family comes from, the pater familias who owns the land and all the people on it, to a system where it was not the pater familias, but it was a community of equals, which is what we were before the opportunistic intrusions into our customs and our cultures.
Gail Smith, I could literally listen to you all day. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your perspectives. Remember to join the conversation from home on social media, following our handles on screen. Stay tuned.
Don't let them silence you. Don't let them silence you.
Sisters, I have a confession. I have participated in forms of patriarchy before. For example, I don't. Oh no! It's true because and I think that took some time to kind of get it out of my head. I think I know, and now I get last. So it's very easy to be part of the system that actually perpetuates these behaviors. Our roving reporter, Nsako Mhlanga, sat down with some of our viewers who weighed in on the conversation.
Question now is men, you know? Men want to get involved. Some men want to get involved. And because they know their friends, they know their peers and how they act and how they are. And now the big question is, can men be feminists? can men be allies?
Definitely, men can be feminists just as much as you get women that are endorsers of patriarchy.
I had to correct myself because I used to call myself a feminist, you know what I mean? But you can never be the thing. It's like a Caucasian saying, I'm a black conscious. You know what I'm saying?
There's this smaller portion of men that are willing to do that. Then the others, like, yeah. It's just that thing about cowards.
It's amazing to me, rather surprising, that you find young men, like 20-year-old, would have these views, these patriarchal views. Like, where do you get that from? You know what I mean?
So if a man is going to talk on feminism, just talk about how terrible we are.
This guy, literally said, if the world is ending, I would rape a lot of women. That's what he said. Literally. And I was like, no, what are you saying? So whenever I see him in spaces, I say, this guy did this, that. Okra basadi. Babant you're being too much now.
But we have to recognize that it's a war.
Yeah.
It's an actual war. In South Africa, we know for a fact it's a physical war.
And that's why we use words like allies, because when you look at the definition of an ally, it's a group that supports a war.
Just like the saying that if you are neutral in situations of injustice, then you're on the oppressor side.
You can definitely be an ally, as long as you recognize that you are not it's not about you, it's not about your praise, because a lot of people are not allies. They want to go and like champion the movement.
You still have abantu bethi, okay, amadoda bethi ngeke ngizwe ngumfazi. So how do we now build more allies when you still have men with that sort of spirit?
That guy, for me, says exactly what I believe. I don't think we're feminist.
Yeah.
Allies, yes. Feminists, hell no.
Look, I have to disagree with you as well as the gentleman in the insert. So feminism is an ideology and it's not about biology. So it doesn't belong to a particular sex or a gender or a particular orientation.
I give a bitando. But I give a because but disappointana. But disappoint tando.
But women also disappoint.
It is very true. It is very true. But then I know what I'm working with.
But I also know of some men who identify themselves as feminist just to get closer to women.
Thank you.
Womanizers, right? And also, Tando, will hyper-masculine men be comfortable associating themselves with the word that has the prefix fem in front of it?
I think they're going to want to run the feminism movement if we let them in.
Look, I think that's an unfair prejudgment, you know. Yeah? There are women who, in fact, use feminism and activism for their own commercial gain. You know, so I think everyone has got the potential to be bad. But I think we do need to trust that, you know, we can be united in ideology and work together. And where people do the wrong thing, call them out, call them in, and that's it.
Men don't know it yet, but they are oppressed, just as we are oppressed as women. So they need feminism.
But the problem is, men will always have privilege. Well, you know, and that for me means that we can never be equal. And even in this fight, because it's difficult to deny yourself the privilege. Privilege is something that feels particularly good. In any case, let's continue this conversation with today's ally, clinical psychologist Mteto Temese.
Oh, sawubona Bhuti Mthetho.
Sanibona sisi.
Hayi siyakwamukela ekhaya. Yabona. Yazi Bhuti Mthetho besikhuluma nje ngendawo ukuthi amadoda, can they really be feminist?
I think for me, if I understand the feminism to be a struggle for human rights by women for women, then obviously men can be allies to that struggle. But I don't think I can call myself a feminist or I can call men to be feminists. I've read that men can be called feminists. I think we can, as men, embrace the struggle for what women are fighting for. It's possible to be persuaded by what feminism is fighting against, which is to dismantle patriarchy, because nathi patriarchy ayisenzeli lutho as amajita.
But can we trust people who are so vested in actually receiving the benefits of the system to actually become so-called allies and possibly even, to my horror, feminists?
With the power that we have by virtue of being men, you know, a lot of us don't want to relinquish that power because it's power that is given. That is something we don't have to do anything for. Just like white South Africans didn't have to support apartheid to benefit from.
Right.
Like, I don't have, with all the struggles I have as a black man in this country, and there are many of those at a personal and otherwise, at societal level, economically, but I don't have to contend with being raped like women are having to worry about being raped. So to the extent that can we be trusted, I think it's something we have to end it one day at a time, as I have understood it, because even from this show, I can go and be violent.
Right.
Need for violence. So I think it's something that we have to be invited. It's like emakaya, you know, as men emakaya, when we eat according to ihlelo. Like there will be senior men, amaxhego, abafana, abancane in kanjalo. Sometimes there are situations where amaxhego, they invite me to eat with them. But it does not mean when there's another feast, I'm going to go and sit with them until I'm invited. So I understand my role or our role as men in the feminist movement to be saying, okay, Mteto, you make music, you are a psychologist, you are a mentor, you work with boys and men. These are our struggles. So as you talk to Amachita, what can you do to amplify our struggle? That's how I understand it, me Nage.
Okay, Puti Mteto, so let's assume, for instance, that you were a gay man living with disability. So what would your authentic allyship look like?
Yes, it's a difficult question. I mean, I'm being sincere when I say it's by invitation, because even as a machita, we've got different interests. Like there are guys who are not interested in the struggles for gay men. If you take Inayaba as an example, as a movie that was there was a huge uproar from Xhosa men who felt that that was undermining our culture, when in fact that story is a story not about even our culture. The location is our culture. So obviously we do not want to talk about the fact that there are men who are Xhosa and gay, you know, who have their own struggles within our culture. So I don't suppose that we should get a free pass. You know, in fact, I always say, Bandwini, you know, just like if you watch these crime shows, you'll find when they find a serial killer, he's likely to have been looking for the killer with the community. And it's usually somebody who's not expected. So even Nati, about dangerous who speak the language is actually those men like me who are sitting here and having So when I say it's a daily struggle, for me personally, it's a transformative struggle. My work in the space, feminism and violence prevention and positive masculinity, I don't do it for the benefit of women. I do it to transform myself as a man that I want to be, because I grew up as a particular man doing particular things that I don't want to do anymore. So until now, we own what do we stand to benefit from the feminist movement, because it's actually a good thing for us as a machita to care about the things that are being raised without feeling that we are losing anything. But can we be trusted? I suppose it's up to women in the feminist movement to decide that.
Thank you so much, Puti Mteto. I like the fact that you can talk about progressing yourself as indoda outside of the relationship with umuntu wesifazane. And that's really important.
Absolutely.
And that's what, you know, being a non-binary and being non-heteronormative is about. And in that, you're interrupting heteronormativity and sexism and patriarchy. Thank you so much for telling your truth.
I absolutely encourage men to be allies. I'm just wary of them identifying as feminists because I'm worried they might disappoint us. What do you think? Can men be feminists? Message us your thoughts on all our social media platforms.
So today, I think we looked at different things. You know, we looked at all the different things that, you know, strides that people made to try and get feminism, you know, to be a movement that is recognized by everyone. But we must admit we have a long way to go. The road is still long, right?
The road is very, very long indeed.
Definitely. For me, my takeaway is that, you know, whiteness, racism, elitism, ableism, sexism, queerphobia, misogyny, misogynoir, were all implanted by a very specific, intentional system of oppression. And so for me, our laws are probably one of the most integral parts in the feminist movement going forward. The truth is that we need to transform our legal education in our society.
Tando, true transformation would be if we recognize our own privileges. You know, we might be women oppressed by the same system, right? But within our own spaces, I'm a black woman, I'm a straight woman, Straight woman?
Heterosexual.
Heterosexual woman. We learn every day, right? Yes, I'm a heterosexual woman, but I'm also an educated woman, able-bodied woman, and I know that I have privileges more than the other women who are not what I just described, you know? So we need to recognize that and be sensitive as well.
Yes.
You know, and as part of recognizing your privilege and also caring about the legal justice system, I also think that it's feminist work, you know, to acknowledge the strides that women are making when it comes to the law. When I just think about domestic workers, for example, who've just won the right to have COIDA, which is the law that means that employees can be compensated for getting injured or falling sick at work, has just been, only now, has just been extended to domestic workers. And I think it's part of feminist work to recognize that and to understand that it's part of our fight to bring more value to the work that women do.
Yeah, I would say for me, my takeaway is that we're at war.
Yeah, definitely.
And if we're at war, it's the only thing you can do is fight back.
Yes.
It's become the MK and pick up arms to show that we're serious. Pick up a shambok, pick up whatever it is that you have to defend yourself because they are coming for us. They are literally coming for us. So I feel attacked.
Yes.
And Mina, if you're gonna attack me, I'm gonna attack you back.
Yeah.
Shem, ask us. If we're going to perpetuate violence, we're not solving the problem. We can't say we want to solve the problem that we are facing right now as women, ailing violent, you know, and making us feel so enraged and feeling like, but wanting to use violence.
But, you know, Fina, fighting means, you know, different things. You know, fighting can be producing academic work. Fighting can be going to a space and just completely flipping everything on top of its head, you know, and defending other people.
It's true. But imagine like if we lived in the same community, all right? And every time
because that practice actually exists in India.
I'm still scared if that's the route we want to take. Honestly, I don't want us to encourage that kind of a behavior because when they retaliate, what's going to happen?
When I speak physically, I also talk about self-defense.
Yes.
A lot of times women raise us so because we don't want to have the other person be hurt. And I'm saying, what if you fought back? What if we teach you how to fight back? There are places to hit in the gonads there.
But how do we hit back politically? You know, I'm so glad that, you know, just this year they had announced, you know, in the 2024 elections, women, let me not say like that because now that would be a command. But in the 2024 elections, independent candidates can now run for political office. And we know how political parties have limited women's participation.
And how
maybe it's time for women to organize independently.
Like, how do we use the Constitution? I think it's a weapon that we must really take ownership of and use, right? Take government to task for not upholding.
But the Constitution also says that the government should not be corrupt. And yet we are living in one of the most corrupt countries, it feels like, in the world. Every single day, our leaders betray us by becoming even more corrupt and not solving the corruption. So I'm sorry. I'm all done with your cute little solutions because I've had it.
Let's do what we can where we are.
Let's not lose hope. Let's not lose hope.
All right.
And I will meet you on the picket line.
You've heard how feminism is fundamentally a reaction to structural, systemic discrimination against women. Over the next 7 weeks, you will be seeing our campaign amplified on all SABC channels, radio and television, through PSAs that highlight the big issues: gender-based violence, intimate femicide, and sexism. It's easy to point the finger at others and blame them for the deeply rooted problems that we experience as women. But I urge all of us to see how we, in fact, contribute to the debasing of women in our daily lives. Sexism is like racism. If you're not working to eradicate the problem, you are a part of the problem.
Yes.
Let's take a look at the next week's PSA. That brings us to the end of this week's conversation. But we'll be back with you next week to talk about patriarchy and why it is so harmful to all of us.
Yeah.
In the meantime, the conversation continues on our social media pages. Until then, Matonga Mnandi.
Yes.